welcome. Let's
Hello.
go live with Jack Kelly. And today you're going to learn everything you wanted to know or didn't want to know about managers. Everybody probably watching here now and who'll be watching the replay, I guarantee you want to watch this and listen to this because somewhere along the line, your manager's driving you crazy and you want to know, like, how the heck did this person be a manager? What's up? What's going on? So we're going to dispel myths and we're going to share like what's going on because we have an expert. So we have Leah Garvin. She worked at Google, Microsoft, Apple. She's a best-selling author and a TED Talk speaker. So we are talking to somebody who like really knows her stuff. So this is just not some random manager. This is a woman who worked at some of the top best companies in the world in management level roles. So this is our chance, my chance, I can't blow it, to ask hopefully some smart, not dumb questions so you could understand about managers. So maybe the first thing, if we could just jump into it, Leah, what what makes like a good or bad manager? Like how does this work out? Like, and then how does somebody get to be a manager?
Yeah. So I love the questions. And again, just say thank you for joining. And it's funny when we talked about doing this and I saw the title, like, why does everyone hate managers? It's a great title because managers they're in a bad, tough
Yeah.
situation. Right. I think we were talking about they're getting pressure from their leadership chain, from their employees. And so I think one thing that we hope to do in this conversation is sort of demystify some of the stuff that maybe is outside of their control. Right. And
Yeah.
so I think for why does someone become a manager? Well, unfortunately, two of the biggest reasons cited by the Gallup organization is that someone is really senior, they're really highly technical, proficient in their role, and so it's like, oh, you should lead people, or there's just a gap to fill. Another manager leaves, so you get put in
Mhm.
that role. So that kind of points to a lot of people become managers not because they wanted to or were good at it or have had training, just because they kind of were pushed into that role. And I think that's one of the first reasons that not all managers are very good at it because it's not just about assigning tasks. It's not just about like approving a timesheet. There's a lot more that goes into it. And so that points us to
Yeah.
like, well, what makes a good manager? I think that's, a lot of times that leaders eat last philosophy by Simon Sinek is like making sure your team has the clarity and expectations, the tools they need to feel successful, psychological safety, which means, feeling comfortable to take risks or try things, knowing that you're not going to be blamed if it goes wrong, but that you kind of create that growth mindset on a team. And I think it's someone that builds trust and takes time to invest in the relationship. And you can actually do all of those things without having had training. Like you can build a relationship with your team members by sitting down with them and talking to them and asking, hey, how do you like to work? Or, how do you like to get feedback? Or if we have to have our hard conversation, how do you want that to go? Do you want to know what's coming? Or want me to tell you all at once? Or we send you an email? So really by focusing on building a relationship and then bringing in again like clarity and expectations, making sure there's really defined roles and responsibilities, making sure folks understand what success looks like, all of those things really point to a good manager. I think on the other hand, a bad manager is someone that's um, like potentially wanting everyone to do things exactly as they would,
Mhm.
right? And that can become micromanaging or just saying like, everybody's wrong when it's not my way, or kind of thinking there's only one way to do something. Micromanaging, like being in all the details and always checking in and not demonstrating that you trust your team members to do things on their own. I think a bad manager kind of has that inconsistency where one day everything's great, one day the next, everyone's wrong and dumb and it's their fault. There's a lot of blaming. So it's kind of the opposite of those things. And like you said, I think we've all had a manager that does the good things
Mhm.
and probably more managers that did the bad things. And because of that, I think a lot of people are afraid to be managers because we're like, well, I've had so many bad experiences. I don't want to be doing that. And then that kind of takes people out of the running that are actually could have been really good at it.
Tell me if this makes sense. I think what happened from the outside, and I don't have no data on this at all, but over, my career of placing people, in executive search, it seems like managers are not necessarily train. Like you'll have somebody who is, let's say, a rock star stockbroker or wealth
Yeah.
manager or investment banker or fill in the blank, right? And they because they're doing so well, now you're promoted to be a manager. Like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, I'm a manager now. With the idea, then the next I'll go a higher manager and keep going up the
Yeah.
corporate ladder. But then they're not trained to do it, and like they don't have the ability to be a good manager because they're a good salesperson, let's say. But now
Yeah.
you're a manager and you're not. Your skills are all offline, right? Like so, then it
Totally.
doesn't work for both,
Yeah. It's a totally different job, right?
right?
Like, and I think and that's what I see the most. I mean, I think some companies have some, video trainings for managers, whatever, like very lightweight. But I mean, a lot of the work that I do with corporate teams is doing manager trainings, really getting the fundamentals, practicing, doing exercises on how to give feedback, coaching managers, doing group coaching. I do a ton of work on manager development because, like you say, a lot of companies don't really have anything, or you're asking people to, like, yeah, do a video tutorial by yourself at your own free time, like nobody's going to
Yeah.
do that, right?
Yeah,
And so they're not getting the support.
like at Google, right? For instance, did they have programs where if someone was started out as an individual contributor and doing really well and moves into management, would they have a whole program to help teach that person to be a manager? Or no, they just say, just jump into it and figure it out yourself.
Yeah, so at Google, they had a course for new managers, like, I
Uh-huh.
think it was like a 2-day training, which was really good. And
Just
so I
two
think,
days?
yeah, I know, it wasn't enough, but it was like they had a 2-day training. I
Oh
think
my
there was more,
gosh.
and there was a lot of self-serve content. But actually, within Google and one of the team on the
Yeah.
AR team, I built a year-long program and facilitated, like, developing trainings and content based on really what are the fundamentals of good management, coaching and feedback and influence. And because you still need, I think, no matter what your team has, you're going to need more things to supplement it. And managers, I think, at Google and a lot, I think the big tech companies where they have the programs like Better Up or Lyra, things like that, you also, some of them give benefits of getting a one-on-one coach, which is also really, really helpful. Because as a manager, you may need to bounce some ideas off someone. Like, is this situation okay? Is it, am I acting right in a situation where it's not you going to your direct manager, where that person has skin in the game? We need an objective perspective to kind of wrestle with some of these things.
So surprising, like that Google would just have, and I'm not knocking, I'm not, being anti-Google, but I would have thought you would have this like very involved program to lead into it. And I think that's to my thinking, that's maybe one of the big issues. So if Google is not doing a lot, then, a lot of other firms that are not as great or don't have the budgets, I imagine they're not even doing anything. And that could be one of the big reasons why people get frustrated with managers because they put you into this role and you're not trained to do it. And now you got to be just take on a whole new job and you don't know what you're doing. You literally don't know what you're
Yeah.
doing. And you
Yeah.
and, you, and
Well,
you're just working on the fly, which could
exactly.
cause chaos.
And it's interesting because, I worked in team
Hmm.
operations and, there was often like, well, why are you doing manager development? Why are you doing management?
Hmm.
Because actually it's often because of manager skill gaps that create operational inefficiencies, right? Like,
Hmm.
if you as a manager
Yeah.
don't know how to delegate, you're going to be making it very confusing for, like, who does what. You're going to be in the weeds too much. You're going to create all these bottlenecks that actually slow your team down. So I see training managers and having, being able to do more with less and having an efficient organization actually go hand in hand. And I would say yeah, the training, sort of basic training they had at Google was
Right.
that 2 day, but they actually did have quite a bit of infrastructure. And I think, I have seen across other large organizations having some things, but what I don't always see is ongoing. Because, hey, you could be a manager 10 years and something's going to come up and you can't, there's like,
Yeah.
what happens then? COVID, right? What happens more generations in the workforce, all this uncertainty with layoffs and with reorgs. So I think what I rarely see companies have, which I strongly encourage them, is ongoing training, not just
Hmm.
for managers, but like sort of situations that will come up. Because to be honest, most the worst managers do not attend trainings. They opt out. They think they're good, right? It's like the ones that are hungry to learn, that's who shows up.
Yeah.
I see it. I saw it when I worked on this stuff internally. I see it as a consultant, like in the training, everyone seems really like awesome and they're super eager to implement. And then you look around, you're like, oh, that's because all the managers that are really kind of absent and not interested, they just didn't show up. So we need to bring more of that into the fold too.
Can I run some of these things by you? This is what I've seen over the years.
Yeah.
You know, no particular order. A lot of times, so you're a manager, and you maybe got that promotion, and now it's really super awkward because you were with your peers, you go out
Yep.
drinking, you'd hang out together, get lunch together. Now it's become you, the manager, Leah, versus your former peers that you all got along with, and now you have this really weird dynamic where, oh, you're too good, like, you know what I mean, like,
Yep.
where it's this tension where everyone used to be really great together, and now you're the manager. Maybe there's a little envy from other people. Maybe
Yep.
you're still just trying to figure out like how to do the job, and maybe you don't do it as well, but you're not doing it purposefully to hurt somebody. So
Yeah.
then you start having this weird dynamics, right?
Yeah.
And, and then do you also find out, I've seen that sometimes people want to leave because they're like, how come Jack got that job? I'm better
Yeah.
than Jack, so I'm gonna look, screw him. And then it gets this negative like snowball effect
Yeah.
where people are disengaged, not productive. Is that a real, like, have you
Oh,
seen
yeah.
that too?
So this is one of the number one things that
Yeah.
I coach folks on,
Oh,
managers
okay.
on, is like how to navigate this transition from being a peer or friends to the manager. And this also can happen with small business owners where you hired your friend or your cousin or something like that. Like that's a whole, and I think the first place we go wrong as managers is we're like, hey, nothing's different, nothing's weird, it's all the same. We have the same relationship, except for now I'm in charge of your salary and career. And that's the biggest misstep.
Yeah.
What we should do instead is actually totally acknowledge like, this is different now. We have a new relationship. We have a new hierarchy differential. We have a new power dynamic. Let's talk about how this relationship looks and how it maybe looks different than what our friendship is if you have a friendship outside. A lot of times we avoid that. We just want to like sweep it under the rug and
Mhm.
say, let's just, get to work. And then people quickly find my team doesn't respect me. They're not listening to me. They still go to the previous boss, so they go around you. And these are the things that I see come up so much. And what I share with folks when I'm coaching them or we're kind of working through this topic as a team is you have to have that conversation. You have to have a reset and say, like, okay, let's call it. It's a little bit weird, and here's my style as a manager. Here's how I want to support you. And here's what I ask of you. And to not go too soft. I have had a lot of clients say, like you said, like, I feel imposter syndrome. I feel like I don't want people to think I'm better than them. So I'm just like, hey, I'm no better than you guys. I don't know why I got picked for this. Right. And you like diminish all your authority. And your team is like, yeah, why did they get picked? They're not even able to like run this thing. So you actually do want to establish some confidence, even if it's fake it till you make it. Because you are in this position, your team is going to want you to be able to step up and know that, like, yeah,
Mhm.
you can carry the team. So that happens through that conversation and saying, hey, I'm really excited about this opportunity. I'm here to support you. Here's what I can do, and here's what I ask of you.
So is that done in like a one-on-one where you'll set a
Yeah.
program like every day you're going to meet with another person on the team and have that one-on-one? And it could be a difficult conversation, but you have to
Yeah.
have that conversation.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I think it's really helpful to do that in one-on-one conversations. If, let's say you and another person were like gunning for the role, to name that and say, hey, Jack, I know that you and I worked really closely together. I know this might feel weird, and I am here to help you reach the goals that you have for yourself in your career. So like you even naming those things so they know you're not just like, screw you, Jack,
Yeah.
I got it, you're out, right? I think and I had this situation at Microsoft. I was I had a manager, they left, and I was running the team in the interim. And then I got someone put, layered, right? Someone put it to above me, and I was really disappointed. I
Mhm.
was like, that should have been me. Why did I get passed up? I was so frustrated. And I met with the new manager, and he said, hey, I know this is really frustrating. I know you were doing the job already, and it's kind of just how it worked out. I didn't realize I'd be put in this situation. and I'm just going to commit to you right now that everything I do is going to be helping elevate you and just like unblock you. And he showed up and he did that. And under him, I got promoted. I had autonomy to really run the team the way that I wanted to. He was completely just like out of the way and only was there to help bounce off ideas and support me. And it showed me that you can take a situation like being layered, which is really frustrating and can be demoralizing, where I thought about quitting
Mhm.
because I was like, hey, they didn't recognize me. And it turned around. And I think that's something you can do too by having that conversation and then like walking the talk.
Now, what happens if you have that one-on-one and you could tell that person has a lot of animosity because
Yeah.
they felt, hey, I should get it. Do you like what do you do? Like, because now you have an enemy in the ranks, right? Like you have
Yeah.
somebody who's trying to sabotage you. We've seen this. We've all seen
Yeah.
this, everyone watching here, where you get ticked off with your manager and then you start like pip, 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 pip,
Yeah.
rumor, gossiping,
Yeah.
complaining, and then you kind of poison the well. Then everyone else starts thinking, oh, yeah, Jack did say that to me too. Ah, and then
Yeah.
it becomes this really toxic environment. Do you sometimes have to the person who you were buddies with and your peers to kind of almost give an ultimatum. Hey, if you're going to, try to hurt me in my new, management role, we're going to have to do something. I mean, do you have to have that hard
Yeah.
conversation?
I think so. And I would say it's two parts. I think it's having that conversation
Hmm.
with the person that's kind of poisoning the well.
Right.
And at the same time, really showing up and getting rolling up your sleeves and being in it with the rest of the team.
Mm.
Because I think the best way to kind of quiet some of that chatter is by being the opposite of it, is by the rest of the team saying, like, actually, that's not what Leah's doing. Like, she's
Right.
actually really involved in this, or she's showing up for me, or she has helped me with this thing. And so I think and this is also advice I have for new managers is to earn respect quickly. I think you can't make people respect you. A lot of times,
Yeah.
how can I make my team? It's like, no, 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 no one's gonna respect you just because you told them to, right? Of course not. But you earn it by getting in it with people. If there's if you're in the office, showing up, not being the one person that's dialing in remotely, being there with them by, sitting down with them and asking, hey, show me where are some of the places that you get stuck with your work, or what's your favorite part, or really like taking that time and learning about the work, the workflows, where, how they approach things. One time at Google, I had to manage an engineer and I have a program management background. And I was like, well, and he looked at me like, what the hell are you gonna do for me?
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like, and it was really awkward. And I felt
Yeah.
at first like, oh, this was a terrible situation. And he did too. He was like, this is like, not gonna help me. It's been a wasted year, however long I was manager. And I sat down with him. I said, hey, I know it's weird. Like I'm not an engineer and I know I can't support you in, growing on a technical capacity, but here's where I can really support you. I can help you wrestle with some of the,
Mhm.
dynamics you're trying to do around influencing people. I can help carve out time for you with your projects to be able to work on, professional development. I can do these things. And we ended up building a really close relationship because I didn't write it off like, well, the engineer's not going to like me, so who
Mhm.
cares? And it was a real learning of taking a situation I was dreading, honestly, because I felt like,
Yeah.
well, he's, this is why am I this? And I was like frustrated about all my team members had different kinds of roles and it was weird. And I was like, you know what? No, I'm gonna actually approach this by rolling my sleeves, asking about his work, having him teach me stuff and not overburdening him with it, but like, hey, show me something that's really exciting. And he started to do that. And I actually learned a ton about it. And I could actually help him solve problems by the end of the relationship.
That's great. I mean, do you also think sometimes with managers, they get a bad rap because they're just stuck?
Yeah.
If you're like a middle manager and you really don't have a lot of power and influence to change big decisions, it's awkward because then your team is pushing you, hey, how come we can't get more funding or how come we can't do this?
Yeah.
And you don't have the clout with the higher ups, so you're just stuck. And is
Yeah.
that kind of one of these, and I don't know if I'm really presenting in the right way, but that kind of vibe, is that what happens to a lot of managers, why they get a bad reputation and why workers don't like them?
Yeah.
Because it's not their fault. They just don't have the power. They don't have the levers to push
Yeah.
and they're just
Exactly.
stuck.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
did a lot of training with this during COVID because
Uh-huh.
people had so many questions and no one had answers. And then
Yeah.
I've done, I think, a couple episodes on my podcast, Managing Made Simple, about, what do you do when you don't have information? How do you
Mhm.
still connect the team? And I think one place we can go wrong is we don't know, so we go silent and we don't answer questions and we say, "Oh, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I will come back when I know something."
Right.
And that looks like you don't know anything. That like literally, and it
Yeah.
frustrates your team and they think like, "Well, what's going on?" People make assumptions. They must not be talking to us because it's really bad. They're planning layoffs. So instead, I think what's really effective, and I've seen really managers that were highly respected take this approach, which is saying, here's what I know, here's what I'm hoping to find out, here's what I'm doing to find out. Right. So, like, let's say people are asking, is there a reorg coming up? We've heard all this chatter, and you say, hey, no, I can't say with certainty there's, any of this right now. But here's what I know. Like, these are the priorities of the team or the company. This is really, those aren't changing. And, these are the forms that I'm plugged into. So maybe there's a weekly, meeting with the stakeholders or whatever, and I will keep you informed as I learn more. And saying that, you still didn't tell him
Mhm.
anything, right? Because you didn't know anything, but you said you're going to be there
Yeah.
working on it
Yeah.
instead of just going silent.
Mhm.
And it's like, it makes such a difference that, hey, I'm working on figuring this out. I think another thing I have seen managers do is say, don't worry, there won't be layoffs, there won't be reorgs. Nobody should ever say anything with full certainty about any of this stuff. We have no idea. And now, and I know you talked about this on the live yesterday. Now they're like, watch out, there's going to be layoffs. I don't think you should do the full other way, but I think what you can do instead as a manager is say, there's so much uncertainty. I can't make promises, but here's how I can support you in developing yourself professionally so that you build confidence in your skills and yourself, whether it's this job or the next one. And that's what I think has been really game changing for managers, that help a person look at their career as, or their job like as a career trajectory, not just this job. It actually creates more loyalty, ironically, because you feel like someone's investing in you. And so, like, just knowing,
Yeah.
okay, this manager is going to help me build my public speaking skills, my presentation skills, my technical skills, all these things that set me up for success if there were to be a layoff or I had to get back out there.
So you bring up two things that I want to unpack. One is that it feels like for a manager, maybe if, let's say, you're my manager, you come up to me right from the beginning, you just started first week or so, to say, hey, Jack, what are your aspirations? What do you want to achieve? What
Yeah,
do you want to do?
yeah,
What's important to you? You know, kind of really just ask a lot of questions.
yeah,
So then you could understand what's going to get me motivated, what's going to make me productive, what would be something that wouldn't make me productive. That seems like it would make a lot of sense to right from the get-go,
yeah,
just kind of ask and try to get that feedback so first of all, then they'll appreciate that they're
yeah,
asking and they care.
right,
And then
exactly,
as a manager what to do to help get me motivated and get up and running.
yeah,
And that sounds like a good way when you were asking, how do you get like respect right away?
that,
Because I would respect you if right away were asking me, how can I help you? How can I,
yeah,
make you improve your career and so forth. So
yeah,
that's good. The second thing, and this is what I think it's on everybody's mind now. We had 2022, going 2023, these massive 10,000 layoffs at a clip. Then coming into this year, the vibe was like, oh, it's going to be better things. And we're not seeing huge layoffs, but we're definitely seeing these like small, nonstop from Macy's to Wayfair to Google to Amazon across the board. And I think that's another issue with managers where people look to your manager and say, oh my God, what to do? And then they're freaked out because they're not getting answers.
yeah,
And I know it's not a fair question to ask, but what do you do? Like when we're in a vibe now where for white collar, mid level senior people, that's where they're cutting because they feel AI can maybe take over or they want to cut costs. So how do managers like navigate? Because that's really tough stuff. And people
yeah,
lose their jobs. It's brutal.
yeah.
Do they have any power, anything they can do to like make it better?
I mean, not from what I've seen. I don't.
Mm,
I think like a middle manager, like you say, has
yeah.
no insight into, who's being laid off, especially, if it's happening at senior levels. I think because of just confidentiality and, publicly traded companies, I think there's very, very few people that have insight, like, so I think what I would say is managers just have to do the thing that just pointed to, which is like, say, in the moment, here's how I'm going to support you. Like, I'm going to help you, you know, feel like you got what you could, the best things that you could get
Mhm.
out of this role while you were here. And I think helping instill confidence in your team members and helping them develop sort of more well-rounded skill sets and helping, giving them feedback and helping them be their best is really the only thing you can do to set them up for the next thing. Because I think what the layoffs of last year showed, the mass ones were a lot of high performers, a lot of folks that have been there 10, 15 years in these
Yeah.
companies. So it wasn't about loyalty, it was about performance. So now you're like whole kind of like put my head down, do good work thing was rocked. And I think that's why it was called the great betrayal in many cases of like, oh wow,
Mhm.
everything I believed about loyalty has just been shattered. And I mean, we could do a whole other live on, team morale, which you talked a lot about yesterday, right? And that's another thing managers dealing with is like this like rock bottom morale and engagement because everyone's like, well, you know, what the hell? Like tomorrow I might not have a job. I might like go on my
See,
email at
right?
3
That's
p.m. and I don't have a
yeah.
job anymore. Why am
See,
I
and
doing
that's the
anything?
whole thing, right? Like it's an awkward spot because if you're that manager and you're not like a senior level, you're not privy to what's really going to happen. They're looking to you, but you have no idea.
Yeah,
Then they get angry at you as the manager because, like, I want to know, do I have a job tomorrow? I have a job next
yeah,
week.
yeah,
We just bought a new home or we just have a new
right.
kid or whatever. And and oh gosh, see, and that's where I think it just gets really ugly, where they don't
Yeah,
have answers and it's not their fault. And it's just
yeah.
everyone's angry with each other.
Exactly, and that's why it is such a hard role to be a manager.
Mm,
I mean, like we said at the beginning, you're getting pressure from your leadership chain, from your employees. You probably have very limited information, and you're navigating the same things your teams are. You
yeah.
have your own manager that you're dealing with. You have your own stresses, your own things, and a lot of managers, I think burnout is one of the highest is on for managers. I think that's where burnout is kind of the highest rate right now because it's you have such a kind of cognitive load of pressure of things that you're having to deal with and then everyone asking you about things and you're supposed to keep people motivated when you're not motivated because you're also worried about your own job, right?
Right.
So I think the kind of acknowledging that. And if you folks listening that are managing managers, recognizing that it's a really tough spot to be in. And so, are there ways you can invest in supporting them, whether it's through coaching or development or, setting up even, peer groups is really effective. Like, hey, having, setting up, hey, every month we're going to have peer groups that talk about topics so people have a little bit of a support system. That was a really effective strategy I've done with teams on setting up
Hmm.
kind of manager communities or circles, giving them a topic. They can build rapport and community internally and have somebody else they can wrestle with these things with. Because I think the other thing is whenever we're feeling stuck, we typically, whatever it is, think we're the only one going through it. We're the only one that's like actually with this manager thing, every manager is feeling most of the things we're talking about.
Right. Uh, I don't mind if people hate me, so I'll be the one to kind of bring these things up. So the feedback I've always seen over the years is this kind of stuff. The manager is like a micromanager, and that
Yeah.
drives people crazy. Where the boss is constantly looking over your shoulder, looking at everything they do. Let's say you write a memo, they look at the memo, they cross it all out, blah 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 blah, blah. And basically they don't make any changes. But it's
Yeah.
just like they're doing it just to just I don't know. It's like they can't help themselves but to just oversee every little move you make, every little thing you do. Then you have the managers who, as opposed to what you mentioned earlier, like show up, be in there early, stay late, do everything to show like you're there. They do the opposite. They're out for an hour and a half lunch. They come in late. They leave early, and they figure, "Oh, I'm a manager, so yeah, I could do that." And that
Yeah.
irritates the hell out of people. It drives them crazy. Also, they play favorites. Like, all right, you'll have your little friends that you give all the cool projects to, and then the ones you're not, they don't get it, so they're isolated. You don't have empathy for people. Hey, they have small children, and no, you can't, come in late because you have to bring your kids to school. Too bad. Like, what?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You can't, nope, you can't go home and see your kids' ballet or t-ball game or whatever it is. And it's like, why are you doing that? You're just really alienating your whole team and driving them
Yeah.
crazy. I mean, is that
Yeah.
also like a big thing that happens that just is just it's like unforced errors? Like, why are you putting in during the pandemic, they were doing that a lot too, where you're putting in all these invasive technologies to spyware on, to
Yeah.
spy on your workers to see what they're doing,
Yeah.
which, like, how do you trust somebody who's spying on you and
Right.
checking your keystrokes?
Yeah, well, and it goes back to, like, those tools are like a replacement for just building trust and relationship with
Mhm.
your team members and building a sense of, hey, we want to bring that ownership mindset and creating
Yeah.
accountability. Like all of these monitoring things are the lazy way because you haven't done the real work to figure out how to, create that bi-directional trust with your team. And I think, you mentioned a few things with the micromanaging. Yeah, I've had that line editing an email that's being sent to two people in our internal team, like spending hours. It's like, oh my
Right.
gosh. And I think what it shows is a lack of confidence in that manager. Now, if
Mm.
you're being micromanaged, you don't realize like it's them, not me. But I think too, this is why things like manager feedback and manager performance reviews are really important because a lot of times there's no channel to give your manager feedback and there's no channel to get that person support if they're terrible at it. And like I said, they're opting out of training. So like how are they getting um and it can be tricky. I think a lot of times people are not forthcoming with their manager performance review because they're worried there will be retaliation. So just like naming that, I think you need to do that in a number of ways to kind of get the feedback. But again, folks listening that are managing managers, holding those managers accountable to not doing these bad behaviors like micromanaging or being completely absent or helicopter managing or playing favorites or retaliating, whatever these things are. I know they're nuanced, but we have to be holding our managers accountable because it just fuels this vicious cycle that you talked about. And I think a lot of times managers act this way because there is no accountability. Because if you deliver great results in your team because you have a great set of individual contributors and you're a mean, absent, terrible manager, there's like no fallout for you. You actually look like you're crushing it because of your team.
Mm.
And that creates even more resentment. And I think all of us have probably left a team at one point being like, I don't want to be putting in all my work for this person to be benefiting, who's like making my life miserable.
All right. Speaking of that, there are a couple of things, right, I've noticed. I think anybody who's watching this now has gone through this, where the process of interviewing lately, you're going to three, four, five, six, 10
Yeah.
interviews, no exaggeration, over the course of 6 months. And then it's like hiring by consensus, like you have to get everybody to agree. And I think that's a poor management decision because they're afraid, they don't want to admit it, but they're afraid to make that call. So
Yeah.
if they were confident in, I think Lee is good, I'm going to hire her, you're going to do it. But because they're not confident enough. Well, Lee is good, but I'm going to interview Jack. Oh, Jack is good, but I'm going to, interview Christine, and I'm going to do the
Yeah.
and keep going, and it never ends. So
Yeah.
now the people on your team are angry because maybe someone had left, through attrition or whatever. There's more work to do. Like, would you freaking hire already? Make a
Yeah.
decision,
Yeah.
and you can't make a decision, and it just drives it
Yeah.
drives the candidates crazy. It drives all the other people involved with the
Yeah.
process crazy, and it's just a really bad environment. And that, I think, also pushes people out because you're like, this is ridiculous. This
Yeah.
is going to, ridiculous. They're not going to fill this spot. I'm going to do the extra work. Screw it. I'm going to start looking for another job.
Yeah, absolutely. I see that all the time. And I think some of the work that I do with teams is like defining, up front, what do
Hmm.
we want in that role? What are the interview questions? How do we all get aligned? How do we make the decision faster? Because, like you say, someone's doing that job, or you either have a team that's completely not shielded from all these things happening. Maybe other teams are asking them to do more work. I think this is the case in like kind of engineering and design kind of roles. Like other people will just start assigning work to people, right? If they don't have that manager. And then yeah, you're going to lose great candidates because they went with the team that was faster. And this was a really big issue during kind of like the, hiring arms race
Mm,
before the pandemic and the early pandemic. And I think um, teams, that are right now that have hiring freezes, you're really overburdening folks on like, hey, we don't have backfills. What you need to do is have conversations about load balancing, not just piling more work on people, because that is resulting people leaving or just getting, all projects at like a lower level of good, quality. So when you're going to have roles that you can't backfill, really creating a plan for how is that work going to get done. It's not just someone does two jobs now for the price of one. No, that's not going to work. And maybe they'll do that for 3 months. But if you have to have someone do that, what I like to do is go to that person, say, let's load balance. I need you to fill these two things for 3 months. Here's my plan to get coverage. We'll revisit this at the end of this time frame, like time box it. And then you'll see somebody has a little bit more comfort stepping up and taking that on. If it's like indefinitely, it's not going to work.
that's so smart. So what do you call it? Load balancing? Is that, I didn't hear
Yeah.
that. I didn't know that term. Load
Yeah,
balancing?
load balancing, like, hey, I have all these tasks and projects.
Yeah.
Here's a set of new ones. What's more important? What's a higher priority? And then if there's stuff lower, kind of waiting on that or giving that to somebody else, but making sure you're not just handing someone two jobs where they don't really know the priority. They're probably working on the wrong thing, the thing that has the biggest fire to put out, and then they're overloaded and they're frustrated, right? Like
Yeah.
when people aren't clear on priorities, there's some magic thing that they always work on the wrong thing, right?
You're
Always.
so right, because like what I hear all the time from people is that, let's say someone leaves, let's say just got a way better job, right? And then you're not finding anybody to fill it, then the people who are still remaining there freak out because they're like, I know what's going to happen. You're going to dump all that extra work, but you're not going to pay me anymore.
Yeah,
So like, why? Like that's not fair. And now you're unhappy, and now you're going to start looking for a job. So it
yeah,
becomes a really bad situation. But what you're saying with load bearing is like, okay, I know this is what's happening. We're going to post a job. We're going to do everything we can. In the meantime, here's what we're going to do. So you, once again, as you mentioned before, kind of, you want to reach out to them and walk them through and explain what you're doing and how to make this work, and how you're trying to make the best of a situation.
yeah, exactly. And that's why, again, that's why I say being a good manager is an operational
Yeah.
efficiency. And that's why I pair my consulting works about manager development and operational efficiencies because they do go together. Because if you're not able to have that conversation or realize like what's the bigger picture, which is a manager skill gap, you're not going to be able to do that load balancing. You're not going to be able to really have a sense of what is a priority or something over something else. You're not going to be able to help that person delegate things they don't need to be doing. And so it ends up, I think again, I look at, doing more with less is like the theme of whatever is going to be the next few years. It has been the last few. And the way to do more with less to get more out of people without burning them out is to make it easier to get work done. So all the work I do with teams is about how can we simplify and make things more clear. And so load balancing is one of those things. Also having it really clear, like what the status of work is. Another thing that can happen on teams is someone leaves abruptly and you're screwed. You have no idea like
Hmm.
where their work was at, what they were working on, if it's
Yeah.
done. And that's something that's totally preventable. We should always have a sense of where to find active work, what the status is, where it's at. And if you don't have that, introducing a really lightweight system, I think there's two criteria I always recommend, which is overall status and capacity. So where is a project at and how much time do people have for more work? If you can just track those things, you get like 90% of the information you need to understand kind of what's going on in your team.
What do you think about this? Like for a while, it seemed, particularly with the tech companies, big tech companies, they would have managers who would just hire like crazy, especially when you had, free money
Yeah,
basically when you turn
yeah,
back the clock where, you didn't have the high interest rates and the high inflation. So you could kind of borrow money pretty cheaply, and they would just keep hiring. And to me, it almost seemed as if they wanted to build a fiefdom.
yeah,
We're like, I'm the manager and now I'm got a big shot manager managing 5, 10, 20, 50, 100 people. Look how important I am.
yeah.
And yet, are they're not productive and whatever. It's just your ego. Is that?
Well, and
am I wrong? Is that a
yeah.
thing? Did that happen? Am I just imagining this or?
I think it happened in some respects. I mean, I think
Yeah.
there's a really clear path inside
Mhm.
large companies if you're a manager, but
Right.
growing your team and having this and you kind of see it growing. And so you're rewarded for hiring more people.
Mhm.
And so that can create a disincentive of like, or a misaligned incentive of
Yeah.
growing quickly, even if you don't clear it on who's doing what, even if projects aren't starting or aren't totally baked. Like a lot of times, for a project to be confirmed, it maybe takes several months to get approvals in a big company, right? There's all these hurdles to go through. So you're hiring up, and then maybe project doesn't happen, or it's scoped down, or something else, and you have built this team based on the incentive of like having a large team under you. And I've seen in every large company I've worked at or worked with as a consultant, like you are more the career path is much clearer as a manager. I know in tech companies, being like a distinguished engineer or a technical fellow, there's like five of them in the company, right? There's not, which is like an individual contributor that's like, at the top of the top. And there's thousands of managers,
Wait,
right?
what
So
is that? Because
yeah.
I've interviewed some distinguished engineers, and like I don't even understand what the heck that is.
Yeah.
What is
It's
what it?
like a way to give a senior title to an
Uh,
individual contributor, basically.
because they didn't want to go and be a manager, but they're
Yeah.
like really smart, really capable,
Yeah.
doing a lot of work. So they give
Yeah.
that kind of title. Okay.
Yeah. And a technical fellow is another that I've seen
Mhm.
used. And it's funny because there's, there's not a lot of them, but you'll have, hundreds of VPs or directors, right? And so you, it's just the path is more clear. And so again, it pushes people into management maybe that didn't want to be or felt like, well, if I want to grow here, I got to do that. Because I mean, I've seen it kind of looks like, well, what's wrong with you if you don't want to be a manager in some of these cases?
Well, what do you think for somebody who's like starting out and building a career? Should they say, "Hey, let's say," and they want to be with a big company, or even a startup, that could kind of scale. Would you advise them, hey, go that track, an individual contributor, then a manager, and then maybe a senior manager and go up? Or if you're really just good at what you're doing, just focus on that and try to make as much money as you can doing what you're good at.
I mean, I think it depends on what the, incentives are within that
Yeah.
specific company, because I think right now from what I've seen, most of the time you're incentivized to be a manager. So I don't want to say no, just do the IC work and crush it, because I have seen that work against people. And
Hmm.
um I
Now, why
have
why would it work against? Because like you're just one out of a whole many, so like they could easily get rid of you. Is that one of the
I
reasons,
think
or?
because you're able to sort of point to more impact when you
Uh-huh.
have more people that you're overseeing, basically.
Hmm.
And so it's like an easier case to be made of, my team delivered this and this and this and this instead of I did this one thing. So I think it's partially that you just have more sort of things you can say you're responsible for in a sense. Um, but yeah, I think more should be done within companies large and small to, have a track for folks that don't
Hmm.
want to be a manager and have that be all the way to the most senior levels, because you I think it would really reduce the problem of having people become managers for the wrong reason. Like, of course it would, right? And so um it's got to be equitable of like, hey, you have these two
Hmm.
tracks, it doesn't work against you. I think some big companies have, if you're a manager, you're a manager and you do some of your own individual contributor work. Some companies have, if you're a manager, you're just managing people, you just do that, which I think also can become problematic because maybe you have a disconnect from the day to day. So every company is very different with how it handle these models.
It's the more we talk about it, it's not an easy job, right?
No,
It's
it's
right.
not.
It's not, it's a hard
Yeah.
job. And it's like, and all fingers get pointed to you, the manager, right? Like no matter,
Yeah.
if things go well, they're like, well, they should, because that's how it's supposed to go. But if they go
Yeah.
bad, it's your fault as the manager, right?
Yeah.
It's rough. It's a
Yeah.
really rough thing.
And you want people to. I was consulting with a company, there's about 40 people, and so they
Mhm.
had three or four managers, and one of the managers was struggling, and when work wouldn't get done, she'd be like, I don't know, the team didn't do it. And we're like, what? Like, that's not, you're the manager. Like, that's not okay.
Yeah.
And you see the opposite, like when someone doesn't take that responsibility, it's like weird. Like, oh no, now we know like you're part of the problem of like, you're not creating accountability. And I think it is that double-edged sword that a manager should feel accountable for their team, even if it's not their fault the work didn't get done. But I think that's another sign of a bad manager. For your first question in our conversation is like someone that's like, well, too bad, my team's not doing it. Like, you holding people accountable in a way that helps bring out their best and create this ownership mindset is, I think, one of the most important things you can do.
Now, you mentioned small businesses, and I think small businesses are like the biggest sector in the business sector. When you
Yeah.
really look at the amount of people working for small businesses, there's more there than hard to believe than these big companies. So if you're a manager, quote unquote manager at a small company, are you really a manager, or you're juggling five jobs? And then how do you manage people? And if it's a small
Yeah.
company, and that is
Well,
that even
and it's
harder?
it's funny because I say, I do work with large companies. I do manager trainings
Hmm.
and manager development. I do feedback trainings, all things in big companies, and I do similar things in small companies, training folks on first that they are a manager. Like if you're a business owner and you've hired folks, you're a manager. So
Hmm.
there's an identity shift there of like, okay, well, that means we have to have feedback conversations. We have to make sure people understand their career path. We have to set expectations. And so the work I do with small businesses around kind of setting up and streamlining their team operations, manager training is a huge piece of that because of what we're talking about here. And you can't, um, if your teams really don't understand what's expected of them, which is something that the manager establishes, how do they know if they're done, when to ask you for approval, when this thing can move down the pipe to this next phase? It becomes a
Hmm.
huge bottlenecks. And I think a lot of times in smaller businesses, that business owner becomes the bottleneck because they're used to just seeing everything, looking at everything, and then in delegating becomes one of the biggest hurdles that I help people work through. And when you can be effective delegating in a large or small company, you show your team member you trust them. You're building your bench of leaders, right? You're maximizing your own time
Hmm.
so you can focus on the right things. You're helping, your team members grow. You're just delegating is one of the most important skills that I think is the most kind of underdeveloped in many of these cases.
Do you think with remote work, you have remote work, and obviously there's been this big push to get back into the office. Do you think a lot of the reason behind managers pushing to get back into the office because it's easier if everyone's in one place and you don't have to worry about hybrid, remote, and everything going on, and you could just walk around the hallway and see what's going on? And selfishly for the managers, their life is easier. Is that something or not?
I mean, this is like the most controversial topic of the world in our moment.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there is so much value in being in person. All
Hmm.
the best work I've done, the most cohesive teams, the most, delivering results against all odds has always been in person. And
Hmm.
I also think there's so much benefit to hybrid and remote, right? Like, you can live anywhere, you can have more time with your family. So I think it's a tough one, but I think the the culture that you can create from having some in-person time, the trust that's built from seeing someone face to face. I'm even encouraging. I work with a team that has a med spa, and some of the team members are in person and some are
Hmm.
calling remote. I said, when you have a weird text or email chain, go in person and talk to that person. You have a facility. Don't let that thing spiral. And I think what happens when we don't make the time, even hopping on Zoom with someone is better than nothing. And we're like just deferring to these asynchronous communications only. We don't feel personally connected to our teams, right? So I think to your question of, I think it does make it easier to
Hmm.
manage because it's contained. I think um, it makes it sort of easier to have a pulse on everything, easier to read body language. And so I don't think it's necessarily out of selfish reason. I think from interpersonal communication, it makes it, you just have more data to pull from. So, but I don't think it means we should force people back into the office or require, I should say, whatever, 5 days, or whatever configuration. I think um more needs to be done though to build trust and build and figure out, how do we keep people on the same page. So when working with teams, we sit down and establish working norms around communication, around having your chat open, around meeting availability,
Mhm.
around when you check your email, so you don't get someone's like, oh yeah, I was just like, didn't see it all day, I missed 4 meetings, 18 chats. And it's like, hey, if you were in the
Mhm.
office, you wouldn't be able to do that,
Yeah.
right? I think having your camera on, setting norms around that, like by default, is important, right? Where you don't have, a tile of video off and you're like, is anybody even behind that? Like, I have no idea. I think in these things, there's accommodations that can be made, and there's different, it's not a one size fits all, but I really encourage teams to have these conversations around remote working norms so that they can bridge some of that gap that's facilitated
Mhm.
by being in person.
I love this. I think this was great, Leah. Thank you, because
Thank you.
it's one of these areas where, as were speaking at the top of the conversation, that like people just it's this built-in animosity towards managers and want to like just throw all the dirt on them. It's all their
Yeah.
fault. But like, I think it's much more from this conversation. It's much more nuanced, right?
Yeah.
There's much more
Yeah.
involved. It's not that, it's not so simple. There's a
Yeah.
lot of work that goes into becoming a manager, what to do, and a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, especially nowadays. So I think this opened up the eyes for people. And I think for people who are managers, they're feeling, ah,
Oh,
some
feeling validated.
they're all happy, Leah.
Yeah.
They're loving you. They're like, oh, you're a champion. This is what we deal with. We deal with
Yeah.
every single day. And for
Yeah.
people who are just throwing stones at matches, like maybe they're saying, like, oh, all right, I kind of get it. I get what they're
Yeah.
going through. Maybe I
Definitely.
should be a little bit more empathetic towards the boss because I didn't realize like how much stress and agita they're going through all the time. So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
this is super helpful.
Oh, good. I appreciate that. And for managers listening, check out my podcast, Managing Made Simple. I share specific strategies on things like feedback, hard conversations, recognition, how to really help folks do more with less. So you don't have to feel like you have to muscle through it alone, or,
Mhm.
figure it out. Definitely check it out. I'm really trying to demystify all these things and share really tangible, practical tools. Because I think a lot of the thing can, think even with many kinds of trainings and manager philosophies, it can be
Mhm.
very heady, and we're like, okay, I have a hard conversation coming up. What do I say? You know what I mean? Like, we need practical tools. So
You see,
that's why I
that's what I
try
like
to
these
help.
kind of conversations. It's not all
Yeah,
jargon and business
yeah.
gobbledygook. It's like
Like
talking like
things
normal
that,
people, what to do, what to say, the
yeah,
real stuff. We don't have to pretend, like you by using highfalutin terms to make ourselves important.
right,
No, it's like we want to help people. So just
yeah,
let's talk normal. So I
exactly.
think this is gonna open the eyes for a lot of people. So I think this is
Good.
great. I really appreciate you sharing it. And yeah, I have years of experience at Google and Microsoft and all these great companies. So you know what you're talking. You've been there, you've done that. So you bring all this to the table. And yeah, feel free if you want to put it in the content in the comments, about
Oh
your
yeah, I'll put links
podcast and
for
your
folks to check
book
it out.
and the TED Talk and all that kind of stuff. And if you
Yeah.
forget, I'll put it in there. Christine will put it in
Yeah.
there too, because I think it's helpful, especially for people who want to go that track and not sure what to do. So they could read, right? They could read up on it,
Yeah,
learn about it,
exactly.
understand what works, what doesn't, what
Yeah,
they should do. Because there are
exactly.
still a lot of people they feel that's the way to get up the corporate ladder. So they want to
Right.
kind of become a manager and a better manager and
Yeah.
hire next level up and level up and so forth. So this way, they can kind of learn and get some insights, from you who've been doing it for, a number of years, you know, um, and they could learn from it and they don't have to kind of just learn by trial and error, but
Yeah.
from an expert.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent.
Well, yeah, folks, please feel free to get in touch. I also have a book coming out March 1st, The Unstoppable Team, where I talk
Nice.
about a lot of these in more detail and kind of how to get your sort of team operations along with the management dialed up. So you're definitely, I'll put a link to learn more about that as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Lee.
Thank
This
you
is
so
great.
much.
This
Yeah,
is
this was an
awesome.
awesome conversation. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thanks. All right. Bye bye.